Hamadakyapi, Nick Tilson, Amachiapi, Chantea Washte Napa Chuzapalo. Greetings to each and every one of you. Welcome to the Radical Imagination shindig here we're having. And I'm actually calling in from the Haisapa here in the Black Hills. I'm Oglala Lakota, President, CEO, and founder of the NDN Collective. It's an honor to be with you here today. I want to start off by giving some woksape in our language and our culture. Is to share some grounding words, and so I wanted to ground us in for us to think for a minute about some of the very first stories that we ever heard as a child. Maybe we were sitting around a wood stove. Maybe we were sitting around a fire. Maybe we were sitting in a inipi. Maybe it was a ceremony. Maybe it was just at a family gathering. But listening to stories and how the impact of those stories had on us as children, and how they informed our thinking and our worldview as we got older. And I think back, to these childhood stories. I remember sitting on the stairs of our house in Porcupine, and my mother, Joanne Tall, who was an old Aimster and activist. All these people would come through on the kitchen table, and I would sit there on the edge of my stairs, and I would just listen. They would tell stories about the occupation at Wounded Knee. They would tell stories about the Yellow Thunder Camp occupation in the Black Hills. They would tell the stories about how they kicked the Honeywell Corporation's ass out of the Black Hills, how they shut down uranium mining for a period of time, and all of these different stories. And I think about those times that those were these verbal stories, but that they shaped me who I am. In some ways, they radically made me think and about what I wanted to do in the future. And so when I think about today and all of these amazing storytellers, that I'm thinking about the impact that all of you who are here, that are performers, that are storytellers, that are telling forms in different art, what we're putting out there into the universe, into the world, is powerful. And it's going to impact many people's lives, including many of us that are on here now. And so I think about those things, and I encourage folks today as we enter into the rest of this day, to think about some of those most impactful stories that you remember as a child that are still with you to this day. And to think about welcoming and ushering some of that, the innocence of those times in, because it'll really make you present today to hear the stories and the powerful things that are going to be shared today. So I'll say that much at this time. And again, it's an honor to be here and excited to lean in and to learn and to sit at the edge of the stairs, but, do it now. Hechitulo.
Bonjour relatives, Mike Jordan, Indigenous, citizen of the Turtle Mountain Band of Ojibwe tribe in Belko, North Dakota. Thank you all so much for having me be a part of your Radical Imagination virtual festival. Today I'll be performing a song called Let's Pray. Thank you all again so much for having me. lot, I'll probably go through a lot more. Thought I seen it all, but I guess said there's more in store. Mama said there'd be days like this, mama said there'd be days like this, but I ignore. Most days I can't even go outdoors. I find it hard to interact with people anymore. As of late, I've been feeling up and down. I guess you could say that I'm still trying to figure it out. Trying to find myself through this black cloud, all this rain over town, it doesn't help. If anybody asks to say I'm okay, now I'm just saying what they all say. Brain only for Sundays, but some days you gotta let it all wash away. Know that there's always a better way. So light that sage and let's pray. So light that sage and let's pray, yeah. And let's pray like it's the only thing you need. Ancestors, will you please help me? And let's pray like it's the only air you breathe. Ancestors, will you please help me? I need your prayers and I need your prayers. Sleepless nights, I was just trying to find my place. So wide awake, feeling like I'm too far from grace. Trying to pray, cause I know I've seen better days. And I could see the pain on my wife's face, telling me that she had it up to here. She been dealing with my shit for too many years. I feel that losing my family's my only fear. Thought of that is enough to wanna disappear. But I'm a father now, so things gotta change. Got a daughter now, and I know she been the best thing. I love her so much, and I would do anything. But I'm a bird who can't fly with these clipped wings. Nonetheless, I'll be back again, that's a promise. Praying for the strength like you and your mother. All I'm asking that you hang on a little bit longer, so I could come back a better husband and a father, yeah. A better husband and a father. And let's pray like it's the only thing you need. Ancestors, will you please help me? And let's pray like it's the only air you breathe. Ancestors, will you please help me? I need your prayers and I need your prayers. And let's pray, 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 and let's pray.
Hamidak yapi, chante washte nape choose ya. Yahipi kinwashte. Greetings, relatives. I greet you with a handshake and welcome you into this virtual space today. My name is Gabby Strong, Assistant Wapton Bidewankan to Dakota, Managing Director of the NDN Collective Foundation, the grant-making arm of our organization. I'm tuning in from Minnesota, Makoche, the homelands of the Dakota people, known as the land where the waters reflect the sky and where we just woke up to our first snow. And as we tune in from all four directions, I'd like to acknowledge our first cohort, our relatives, our radical imagination artists and creatives who brought their vision, voice, energy, and expression to helping us all glimpse a world and a reality grounded in justice and equity for our people, our lands, and the planet. To our communities and our people who we love deeply, to our allies, comrades, supporters, advisors, mentors, we welcome all to this virtual space and to this conversation. 1 year ago, 10 artists and creatives from across Turtle Island, the original Indigenous regions beyond the post-colonial borders of so-called United States, Canada, Mexico, and island nations embarked upon their own creative journey as storytellers in various forms to radically imagine a just future. They did this while being grounded in and connected to their communities, and while also expanding their community and audiences and amplifying and changing narratives. All of this during a global pandemic, during one of the most uncertain, transformational, and revolutionary times. We're here today to listen, to learn, to enjoy, to be challenged, and to celebrate all that they've brought forward. We thank them for sharing their incredible talents, their visions, and voice with us. And we thank you for being part of this special moment. Wopira Tonka Echichapia, with great gratitude to all.
You awawa, good morning, or bishat you tabino, good afternoon, wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Sarah Sunshine Manning, and I am a citizen of the Shoshone-Paiute tribes, and I'm also Director of Communications here at NDN Collective, and I will be hosting the next part of our conversation today on the Radical Imagination Virtual Festival, Part 1, which is the first part of our two-part series of the Radical Imagination Virtual Festival. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much, Gabby, for those beautiful words. Just always an honor to hear Gabby, a matriarch of our work here at NDN Collective, speak about this really incredible program that we have here at NDN Collective with the Radical Imagination Artist Grant Program. Also, thank you so much to Nick for your opening, your really grounding words, and last but not least, Jordan, for that fantastic performance. Jordan is amazing, also a member of the NDN Collective team here. So, jumping right into this segment of Part 1 of our Radical Imagination Virtual Festival. So we're going to be joined in the next several hours, the next few hours today, by all 10 of the Radical Imagination artists and storytellers. These are artists and storytellers from across Turtle Island, from so-called Canada, so-called US, and so-called Mexico. We recognize in this work that colonial borders have only been a tool or a function of entities not from our own communities. So this Radical Imagination Grant has been an amazing opportunity to bring artists and storytellers and folks who are envisioning a more just and equitable world through their creative talents. So in this portion of our first program, we're going to be joined by 3 of the 10 Radical Imagination artists in a roundtable discussion. And in this discussion, all of the artists will have an opportunity to talk about their work in the past year, to interact and engage with each other, and to share with us some of the ways that they envision a more just and equitable future. But before we get into that, I wanted to talk a little bit more too about the past several months of our team's journey with interacting with all of these artists and getting to know them as we do the work of telling their story. So Part 1, as I mentioned for today, is going to be roundtable discussions. And in Part 2, we're going to be showcasing a series of short films where you can more intimately interact more intimately see the work of all 10 of these artists. Our team had the great honor and privilege of visiting all of these artists, visiting some of their homelands, having rich conversations with them, being in their studios, being in their communities, and seeing just how they pour their art into this craft. What we also know at NDN Collective is that social transformation happens through art. And art has always been a part of Indigenous cultures. Art and storytelling have been foundational. Art and storytelling are ceremony, they're life, they are sacred, and we know through art and storytelling since time immemorial, our people have been deeply rooted to what matters most to us. Our values and our teachings, our connection to the land have all come through art and storytelling. And with this Radical Imagination Virtual Festival, we're also going to be talking about how the Radical Imagination Grant in particular has really been focused on getting to the root of injustice, getting to the root of inequity, getting to the root of all of the many ways that our people have face settler colonialism, and still today deal with the residual effects of that. But with art, with the social transformative nature of what all of these artists and storytellers are creating, they're imagining more just and equitable futures. And so, again, absolute honor to be a part of this conversation. Thank you so much to Gabby and others who have entrusted me to facilitate these conversations, and I know that everyone will enjoy the conversations today, and if you're joining us later, not joining the live program, I hope you enjoy it as well. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and invite our first round of artists into the room. Today, for part one of this program, we'll be joined by Selena Martinez, Simone Cedillo, and Joaquin Reyes Maldonado, and then we'll also be joined by a couple of translators who you'll hear in the background. So we'll go ahead and get started, and we'll get started by going around the horn and having each artist introduce themselves. And so we'll get started with Selena, then we'll go to Simone, and then Reyes. And if each of you could just firstly, of course, share us your name and the community that you're coming from, and then also tell us about your work. The work that you've done in the past year in your community, and we'll be here for the next 45 minutes or so, so definitely take your time. We want this conversation to be really light, and also to give you all an opportunity to interact with each other. So yeah, we'll go ahead and get started with Selena.
Thank you, Sarah. Chanabu. My name is Selena Martinez. I'm Yaqui and Chicana, born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona. I associate myself to the Yaqui communities here in Arizona, Guadalupe, and Penhomo, but our ancestral homelands are in Sonora, Mexico. I am trained as an architectural designer, and my project that the NDN Collective supported is called Webinaria, which means plural in the Yaqui language, and it is a project that focuses on uplifting a variety of Yaqui identities in past, present, and future representations of our community's histories, our present situation and potential, and into the future of where our Indigenous communities can evolve into through architectural visualization, design visualizations, and engaging cultural learning tools.
Hello, my name is Simon Cedillo. I'm a descendant of Mestizos from Las Vegas, New Mexico. I currently live in Oaxaca, Mexico, and most of my work is in so-called Mexico. I am a community rights defense organizer, a filmmaker, a writer, an artist, and now, thanks to the Radical Imagination Grant, an author. It's a real honor to be here with y'all today. My work has always revolved on looking at grassroots community-based organizing for self-determination, self-defense, and autonomy, grassroots liberation. All my work has revolved around that. I've done journalism work, I've done documentary work, I've worked as a professor in political economy and geopolitics, I've run study abroad programs, and I never really thought that writing a book was going to be a work of art. My writing was always usually political and academic. And this time, with this book, I've actually written a nonfiction narrative that is very much so a radically angry and imaginative piece of art. So I'm really happy that this happened. I don't know how else I would have been able to do it. In addition, I participated in a collaborative film project called Without Men or Bosses, which is also completed and is going to be available online very soon. It's entering into a festival, as a matter of fact, this Monday here in Oaxaca, so we're super excited about that. And then with my self-care stuff, I was able to get accredited as an instructor in Muay Thai, which is a traditional Thailandese martial art. So I've been doing that, and my first student is taking their first exam on December 15th, so I'm very excited about that. Thank you so much.
¿Me escuchan? ¿Sí?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? My name is Joaquin Reyes Maldonado Gamboa. I'm from the Mayan community in Yucatan, and we are on the coastal part near the beach. And the work that I presented for NDN Collective for Radical Imaginations is called Remnants of the Future. And this is something that I did within my community together with farmers, people that are working in the fields. We were able to clean up like our jungles, our mountains, our hills, and we started to recycle much of the material, and I started to recycle it within my independent space. The space that I have is independent, and it's more, I did like community workshops, and I organized my artistic production, and the community got involved in some of the projects, and thanks to this grant, I was able to do this project called Vestigios, or Remnants in English. And so we were able to do other projects. We were able to do traditional gardens, and we call them canche in the Mayan language. And we were able to deploy all this project throughout my community in Sinache. We also did it in San Crisanto and in other communities. And it was a great experience, a lovely experience. And everything that I did, because I had always wanted to do something like this, but because I didn't have the support and or any other reasons, we could not do this. But this has been a really enriching experience. And I was able to do this workshop, that we have our own workshop. We can do this independently. The community gets involved. They know all about it now. And more than anything, we are trying to protect our environment, to create in our own gardens and our own production of vegetables. And we are going to reactivate and do for the Mayan language. We're going to give classes on the Mayan language. We do a little bit of everything. We do a little bit of activism, a little bit of art, and a little bit of community collaboration. And this had been great. And thanks to the support of this grant, I've been able to do great things, big things, and we're going to continue to do this in the future and do this in our independent space. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joaquin, and just so great to see all of your faces again, and to hear just a little snippet of your work again. And, you know, kind of listening to all three of you as you're all describing your work, what I'm definitely connecting or like thinking about is that you are all doing a type of work connected to community that some folks might not have traditionally in the Western world thought of as art. You're doing something, you're connecting to community, you're imagining community, you're a community organizer, you're doing writing and filmmaking, you're connecting to the land and with farming and agriculture. So I'm curious that, and maybe each of you could kind of react to this, prior to doing your community work, prior to getting involved with the Radical Imagination Grant Program, did you always consider yourself an artist? And how do you sort of like wrap your head around this idea of what it is to be an artist or a storyteller? And I say that, I know that's really sort of really open-ended and nebulous, but what I really want to get at also is this fact that with this grant, we have absolutely kind of gone outside of the box of what the Western world might think of as art, because to Indigenous people, art and storytelling is really, it is different. We connect to it differently. It's a different type of tool that maybe we use differently. So yeah, circling back around to the question, prior to being involved with the Radical Imagination Artist Grant, how did you all see yourselves in this world of art? Did you see yourself as an artist or a storyteller? And maybe how was that different for you as an Indigenous person? And yeah, any one of you can jump right in on that one first. Well, actually, let me just we'll just go around. We'll start at the top again, and you can react after that. But we'll start with Selena.
Okay. I personally didn't consider myself artist or traditional artist due to the fact that my focus or career choice was architecture. And I know architecture is a combination of art and science, at least according to the academia. But personally, I never really was like in gallery shows showing architectural things, or I just didn't really feel connected to that world of art, or nor did I see people that look like myself in those contexts, similarly to the context of the architecture industry. So I think there was a lot of, for me, need to confront why I didn't maybe think of myself as an artist or see myself in even the architecture industry as a woman and somebody who's Indigenous. It is very obvious over time when you're studying a specific subject and the people teaching you are not of color, or they're not female, or they're not Indigenous. So I think it becomes very obvious over time, and it begins to bring up that concept of relationality of, do I relate to this, or are my peers relating to this in different ways that I'm not, or do I relate to this in a different context that maybe isn't validated by these institutions or these areas of art or architecture. So personally, I didn't, but I think now, I think an artist is kind of like a label. I think there are many layers to what that can mean, and they're similar to like my project. There's a variety of ways to interpret what that means to different people. And for me, I guess I would consider myself more as a designer, but I do think designers can create art and things that are informed by art. So I think there are many layers to what that title could be, but I definitely feel that this project has pushed me to include my work or creations or architectural ideas into those realms to also influence the way that other artists are thinking about their modes of practice, or how they go about their techniques, and finding ways to collaborate with other types of artists and working with different mediums and seeing what the outcome of that could be, specifically, ideally, with other Yaqui artists, to support and continue the futurity of the project that I'm currently working on.
Yeah, that makes sense. And of course, I think all of these boxes or these labels from this very Western world that, we have no choice but to be so influenced by, as people who have experienced colonialism, there's often that questioning of like, am I that, or am I an artist? And I've had that same sort of wrestling personally. Like, I consider myself a storyteller, but thinking about like, what is art really? It's creativity. It's the art of your mind taking nothing or taking something really created from nothing, from your own mind, and whether that is a master plan community through architectural design, or putting words on a paper, composing a song, it's very different. And so I think recognizing ourselves as having creativity within us, being sort of like microcosms of creation. Creator creates, Mother Earth creates, and we also create. Yeah, Simone, would love to hear from you next. I know you do a lot of work. You're a writer, you're a community organizer, you're a filmmaker. How have you sort of wrapped your head around what it means to you to be an artist? Did you consider yourself an artist? And yeah, maybe like just generally, how do you identify yourself as a person who does this work?
Yeah, well, it's to me, it's been a journey, and honestly, I feel like I came to the work that I'm doing from a place of anger, from a place of being criminalized by a criminal system, by a criminal structure. And I wanted to do something to fight against that, to point out who the real criminals were. And video and stuff like that became a tool for doing that, became a tool for self-defense. And to a certain degree, it was a weapon, right? And I came at this as a fighter. I've been a fighter the whole time. And it's taken me time to understand that fighting is an art, like martial arts, right? And with the help of this grant, I've gained a lot of focus on the idea that art is a weapon, right? Art is a weapon of self-defense. However, in the art world outside of the NDN Collective, I don't think I'm very fundable. Because all I do is piss people off and point out what's wrong and rock the boat, and most of funders aren't really about that. So I was really surprised and really excited and overwhelmed by the idea that this type of art as a weapon could be fundable. That blew me away. I've never been funded for anything before in my life. I never expected to be funded for anything in my life. And I much less never expected this book to get funding to get done. Never could have imagined that. And when it comes to writing, the way that I'm writing from the perspective of political economy and geopolitics, but also from the perspective of a criminalized adolescent youth with a lot of rage that is now a 46-year-old man, and is still has that still very much so present. It's amazing to be able to write this book in such a way that it's going to work academically, it's going to work artistically, and it's going to work politically as a weapon of community rights defense. So thank you very much to NDN. And because of this, now I'm thinking I should probably write a fiction book. So thanks, y'all, for pushing me into art. It's definitely been a long but very healing process. This has been a very healing process of finding these tools of expression for the rage that I've carried this time.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Simone. Such an honor to be connected to your work and to be a small part of supporting it. And I think you touched on a really important point, that Indigenous work, Indigenous perspectives, our valid and dignified rage is often twisted and misconstrued by non-Indigenous people, non-Indigenous institutions. We've been made savage since 1492, right? Like our existence, our defense of ourselves, our defense of our communities have essentially been turned on us to be the bad guys, essentially. And because mainstream narratives, from the government to media, there's still so much work to be done there to undo generations of making Indigenous people the savage, making Indigenous people the bad guys. And so just really, really deeply appreciate you sharing how your work, or just like your experience with having your work supported or not supported in the past because of dignified rage, coming from that place of pain because of what's happened to our people. And that's so important for people to hear, so important for people to know. And just really, really grateful too to be connected to this work, to be able to support more people that feel like their work is being glossed over, their work is being diminished because it's not happy art, you know. And art, like you said, is a tool, is a weapon, and sometimes we got to defend ourselves, and sometimes we're angry while we're doing that work too, and that's important to just let it be that. Anyway, I super appreciated that. Oh man, I'm just so excited to see your work. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Joaquin, same for you. Like your project that you described is so dynamic, so outside again of this box of what we've been sort of conditioned to think of as art. And it's very community based, very land based. It's not necessarily like a tangible thing, like a painting on the wall or a singular item that you create. It's this whole entire universe, if you will, experience, if you will. So same question to you, just reacting to how you perceive art coming from your context as a Maya person, and just doing the work of being connected to community. Have you considered yourself an artist, and how do you perceive art as a tool?
Bueno, yo me formé como artista.
I was trained as an artist at the university, but I only studied in the city. I just went to study art, and then I went back to the community. So I grew in my community until I was 18. Then I went to do community service to other communities where I was teaching kids in kindergarten, so I could have like possibility to get a grant and continue to study at university. So I took advantage of that grant and I went to the city to study art at the art school. They never taught me community-based art or indigenous art. They say, no, you're going to learn contemporary art, painting. And this is where I was trained. But when I would go back to my community, I would feel the need. It's like, okay, when I complete my studies, I'll go back to community. I felt the need to go back to my source, my origin, my roots, fight to have an independent community-based space, cultural space, because you cannot count on Mexican government. We have to fend for ourselves and with our people, and this is what I did. I completed my studies. I went to Sin and Chair, my community, and I started to work in an independent, precarious space. There was a space, it was just a room. I had no bathroom, no toilet. I just had a space to produce. And what I did is I was teaching sculpture, restoring courses to kids, and I was like wondering, and my friends were asking me, well, and I was asking myself, how are you going to get funding to go back to community and work? And I was would be in the fields with the crops, and at the same time in my workshops, so that I could get funding. And then when I got the NDN grant, I had a more decent space. I have a toilet, I have a bathroom, I had space to work, and I'm closer to community. And from there on, I started to get more involved with community projects. I was a farmer with my grandfather and other kids. I would always be in the fields, and I'm kind of angry because the overproduction of food is invading us and they're using our space, our milpas. And my concern is that in the long term, this will be the end of our land, of our crops. So what I do with community-based project is to go and rescue, to make sure that we will survive to all of that, and to turn it around, and to give some food for thought, some criticism through my work. And from there on, maybe we are creating community-based projects. We are recovering ancestors' crop tradition from the Maya time. And it's like I'm becoming very resilient to invasion. There are many issues, like environmental issues, political issues, and all of that. Because I feel like I don't feel an artist in capital. I'm just Reyes and I have many nicknames and I'm just one more in the community. I'm not the artist. I don't go to community and say, this is what we're going to do. I just pick up ideas from friends. Maybe he's not an artist, he's a farmer. And I say, well, why not do that? I don't feel like I am the colonizer. I'm the one imposing anything. I'm just one more in the community. I'm Reyes and that's it. Thank you.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Just a part of the community is so refreshing to hear from other Indigenous people and to really see that difference in how we relate to our surroundings, our people. And I think a difference in the Western world of art is that artists are sometimes really exceptionalized, in the sense that, their names as individuals are really prominent. Their pieces that they've created are really prominent. They can create this life of great wealth and just notoriety as an individual. But what I'm hearing really consistently from all of you is that it's very community embedded. You want to see something better for your community and for your people. And the way that you contribute to that, how you were speaking to so eloquently, Joaquin, is that you're just a part of the people, and that's how you show up and do the work. We all bring our gifts and our skills, and not to overly romanticize our past, but pragmatically, that's how our societies worked at one time. We all showed up with our gifts. Everyone all showed up with, whatever creative talents that you had, and contributed something. And maybe we didn't consider ourselves artists way back then, but we knew that we had this creative potential within us, that if we had this idea, if we had this solution, we could make it happen. And we wanted to help our people with those creative talents. And so, yeah, really, really different way of perceiving art and how we can use that as a tool. And so just really love how each of you responded to that question. The next thing that I'd like to get at also, I think, just jumping right into some of the more complex and the more challenging aspects of doing this work within a colonial, underneath settler colonial states, or being a part of that existing. I'm struggling with trying to say that right without like over empowering settler colonial states, but to like acknowledge that reality, that's the reality that we're all dealing with. What are some of your greatest frustrations doing either community-based work or art? And we touched on them a little bit, but what are some of like your biggest frustrations and challenges as you see this future that you want to create with your creative talents and tools, but there's obstacles, there's challenges. So yeah, what are some of those challenges for you all, and what are some of your greatest frustrations as an artist, as a community organizer, I'll say. And yeah, if anybody wants to just jump right in first, we'll try to approach the conversation too, maybe a little more loosely. I know we've kind of been going around, but definitely feel free to like react to each other, respond to each other, ask each other questions. So I'm going to try to like step back a little bit more and just, yeah, free flow conversation. What are some of the frustrating things for you? So yeah, acknowledging that there might be some pauses here, but yeah, we'll just go with it. So
I can jump in. I got a lot of frustrations.
yeah.
I mean, just right off the bat, the nation state itself is a frustration to me and everything that I'm doing. The legitimacy of the nation state, of business, of banking, of finance, the way it's purported to be in the world, to me is an absolute farce, right? Us having allowed business, politics, governments and finance to decide what our future is going to be like and look like, and give them that legitimacy, that has been a huge frustration in my life. Right now, this like current global upswing towards fascism has been extremely psychologically detrimental and extremely frustrating to see that happen. But then I have to be honest. To me, even more frustrating than that is what I call laissez-faire weather liberalism, where, you know, folks, even from like our part of society, continue to perpetuate and legitimize electoral politics, continue to perpetuate and legitimize institutional forms of government, continue to perpetuate and legitimize charity instead of solidarity, continue to create these situations where true grassroots liberation becomes almost impossible, you know? In my book, I talk about the neoliberal military political economy and agents of that neoliberal military political economy, which are the military industrial complex, the corrupt legislative process and electoral process in the United States and Mexico, these corrupt banking institutions, which more and more are coming out that they're laundering all the cartel money, you know, all these different things. But then on top of that is average everyday folks who allow this to go on, you know? And in the United States, I feel like a lot of our people, both native and non-native, black and non-black, people of color, are caught up in a prison of their own comfort, you know? Like, instead of resisting this thing that is systematically built upon the back, sweat, and blood of many people, we perpetuate it because we're comfortable, or to a certain point within it. And to me, that is the most frustrating thing in all of this. I almost would rather confront a fascist than confront someone who seems down, but at the end of the day is simply perpetuating the existence of these structures of this system. And that has been frustrating. And I definitely go into that at least a little bit in the book. Then in general, two things that have been frustrating, but I've used as a motivating force is, one, my whole life being told that's just the way it is. Cálmate, that's just the way it is. Deal with it. That's just the way it is. Well, that drove me to be like, no, this is absolutely not the way it is. And this is not how I believe it should be. And then the other one was being told that my ideas for grassroots liberation were very ambitious. You know, that's like kind of like that pat on the back that's a slap on the face, right? And I instead of allowing that to become a slap in the face, I just been like, okay, you think that's ambitious? Well, I'm going to show you that it can be done, and it has been done, and there are examples, and there are ways, and that those ways can translate into different realities in which we can then carry out possible strategies of liberation.
Love it. That reframe is powerful.
Yeah, and I would go ahead and add, speaking of capitalism, in relation to our built environment and in general the environments that we live in, we are on this trend of just following the status quo of how we go about, you know, even developing our cities, our buildings, our communities, our the places that we live, and the places that are supposed to support our well-being as humans. The thing about that is that, you know, for example, I live in a desert, and here the status quo is stick frame construction and glass buildings. How does that make sense for the context that we live in? Yeah. And I think this also, you know, is connected to a bunch of wicked problems as far as like water resources, how we're getting our food, the economics of all that goes into that, and why it is that is the status quo for the way that we construct and build in the desert. And I think that is just like one example of how that how capitalism and the way that we are influenced by the dominant society is really forcing us to kind of stay in these cycles that are not really supporting our the well-being of people in general in the way that is more communal and less individualized and focused on only, you know, supporting an individual instead of a community as a whole. We're not thinking like that anymore in many areas. I think another aspect, at least for me, is like the suppression of the matriarchy. That's like one of the biggest things I personally have to deal with in my industry, and I'm sure many other industries, and why there's a lack of representation of women in these fields that can actually have influence in the way that we develop our cities. There's a definitely huge imbalance of power sharing for women in positions of power and leadership. So that's another area that I think is very lacking in many industries and in many places that I interact with as an architectural designer, whether that's political, whether that's like literally, you know, working with other people, contractors, construction workers. It's very male dominated, and there is definitely an obvious, I would say, you know, kind of assumption about women in this field. And I think as another aspect of power sharing is like considering the next generation's opinions. I feel as though often, you know, the adults or the elders tend to often forget about the next generation's voice and don't often connect to what their way of life is now with the influence of, you know, technology and how they best learn and what their concerns are for the future. I think we're missing something when we don't have the younger generation as mentors for the future. And then I would also say the validation of multiple realities. You know, some realities are just unthinkable to the dominant society. If they haven't lived it or if they haven't experienced it, they're not thinking that that is a reality of somebody else, or, you know, understanding that there are other ways of being in this world that are beyond just what they know as the Western way. So I would say those are all aspects that concern me in the work that I do.
Yeah, love it. Great, Joaquin. Some of your greatest frustrations as a community-based artist, things that you've had to navigate with your work, that are just especially unique for you coming from your frame of reference as a Maya person.
Pues como dice Simón, he tenido varias frustraciones, ¿no?
Well, as Simon said, I too have had a lot of frustrations dealing with environmental things in my community, how our lands are being destroyed, where I live, part of what is southern Yucatan, all this problem of the Mayan train, or called Tren Maya. They're devastating a lot of our territory, and the pillaging of the remnants that they're taking from us. They're stealing from us. They're not worried about really conserving our true cultural heritage as the Mayan people. And then I have another frustration is that there's very little support for for cultural things, for community things, for art. Here in the Yucatan communities, it's very minimal, the support for these kinds of things. And that's really frustrates me, because they're just worried about their own well-being. The governors, the officials, they don't look for a well-being in common. In the communities, we have so many needs. We have such a strong culture in our language and in so many things. And there are those kinds of things that really frustrate me. My frustrations go from the environment here in the context of my community. Where I live, it includes a small community on the beach. There's a port, and they're starting to devastate the wetlands, the flora and fauna there. And this is really a frustration because I know that art is a really powerful tool to create things, not just individual things, but really to involve the community and to raise our voices. And these are the kinds of things that frustrate me. And when there was an unfortunate thing that happens, when there's a hurricane or a tropical storm, then these Mayan architecture falls, and then the government says, oh, you're not going to have your traditional Mayan house. You're going to have one that will be useful. They say, maybe you can reconstruct your own Mayan traditional house, but then they don't allow us to do that. We're losing this. And they say, here, take this house. Don't construct your Mayan house. You need to live in this kind of a house now. But rather, we could reconstruct the same one, and the same one that we had before, that people are accustomed to living in, those typical homes. This is our inheritance, our heritage for many years. And with the material that we have, the wood, the grass, all these things, we've had them all along. This is our resources. And these are things that have affected our culture. I can't sit still. I have to do things.
Yeah, I think what you shared, Joaquin, really points to, I think, also this moment that we're in, where we're in this critical moment of climate crisis, of our earth and our lands that our cultures and our communities are very much connected to, are being devastated and impacted, and extractive industries around Indigenous communities are also, negatively impacting our lands in more immediate and direct ways as well. And so all of you really named so many of the frustrations of other Indigenous people too, and absolutely not to go down this path of complaining about all the problems, because we clearly know that you're all here not because you operate from a place of just like doom and gloom, these are all the problems, but that you recognize the problems. You can name them and you see them and you use your gifts to radically imagine the future. And to be radical, if you look at the definition of that word, really means to get to the root. To get to the root, and the root sometimes of these problems has been buried for so long that it really is uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable for people to deal with and grapple with and to see and to wrap their heads around, and it's not pretty. It's not, but I think it's important for us to know how to see that, name it, really understand the ugliness of it too in order to dismantle it so that we can radically imagine something better. And so with that, I'd love to hear you all just react also, or share a bit about how your work, whether it's through writing or storytelling or filmmaking or imagining community or building community or building these art spaces, how you've been able to sort of deal with that angst or frustration and anger in a way that doesn't really defeat you or slow you down, but instead it propels you forward. So yeah, what does your art, your craft do for you spiritually and personally? And I know it's obviously not just a personal thing, it's a community thing, but if you can really talk to that very personal experience with what it means to you to do that work. And anyone could just jump right in as well.
I'll go. Connecting to what Ray was just talking about, and all those different aspects from the environment that are incorporated into Mayan architecture, and similarly to all Indigenous people, they derive their, and create their dwellings and environments and communities from their surrounding environment, connected to the climate and connected to that place. And that becomes part of the culture, right? So for me, architecture has been a lens to reconnect, as Yaki from the America, which has another dynamic and I think helps me reconnect to the ancestral ways of my indigenous people along the Rio Yaqui, and like the traditional ways that our worldview pre-contact was actually embedded in that place, and not in Catholicism that was brought into our community. It was connected to our ancestors from our emergence story, and the way that we interacted with that place and along that river and along that ocean. Those are all significant to what makes or informs the way Yaqui people see themselves and who we are today. And obviously over time, the hybridization of how the external inputs into our community have influenced that changing identity or evolving identities has really helped me understand, there's not one way to be Indigenous, there's not one way to be Yaqui. There are many ways and, once again, many realities to understand, and look at, or reference points to begin to, go deeper into the identity of, whatever cultural connections or relationalities you may have as an individual. So personally, that has been one of the biggest things for me to, connect architecture and my identity together. And now, with the opportunity to create a project around my identity has really been empowering for me to go deeper, supporting communities in Rio Yaqui with, especially during the times of COVID, being able to put a more concise or additive type of history on social media and on the website for Yaquis who maybe also feel disconnected to our history, to better reconnect and to understand some of those layers and dynamics of how we were talked about, even in newspapers, or how we were talked about in academic papers or other aspects like that. We haven't been telling our own story. Other people have been telling the story of who they think Yaquis are, not the other way around. We, tell stories orally, but, sometimes that's not necessarily needs to be recorded. It's more of a revealed aspect during the storytelling. So I think merging both historical storytelling and influencing through having an additive aspect to my project has been really important and engaging for people who are, paying attention and trying to find ways to visualize the history and also, actually have authentic representation moving forward. And then as well as documenting some of these significant places so that it becomes a cultural learning tool for the people who maybe can't go back to our homelands for whatever reason, or haven't had the piqued interest to go back to our homelands for whatever reason, or their parents, never told them about the homelands and they didn't even know Yaquis came from Mexico. Like, there's so many crazy dynamics, and I think what my project has aimed to do is really just create a new reference point or a new area for people to engage with, both, from the past, present, and hopefully into the future, where we can all contribute, what those visions could be for all Yaqui communities, ideally, so that we can envision a future together.
Thank you, Selena. So Simone or Joaquin, either one of you, if you could just share a bit more about how your work has allowed you to process frustrations and to creatively work through those frustrations in a way that gives you hope or, creates a solution. And what has that experience been for you with your project or with your work?
Yes, I can go. One of my editors is one of my students. She's a Purepecha who's living in Washington State, and she's just amazing. And in working out the forward that she's gonna write for the book, she brought out a lot of stuff that covers this. And one of the things is that I realized today that I'm writing for that criminalized, angry adolescent that I once was, knowing that things were wrong, but not really knowing how to explain it. And having the words now and sharing the words for those future generations, just to be able to have them be like, I knew it. I knew everything was messed up. I knew this was set up against me, and this is great. I feel like that's been super healing. No, the other thing is in particular this subject matter of self-defense and community rights defense, community-based self-defense. On the one hand, I practice a martial art, but the concept of community-based self-defense is much larger to me, and is something that that I feel has been silenced consistently over the last several decades, in particular by activists and organizers in so-called United States and Europe, that have a propensity to lean much more towards nonviolence, or what they call pacifism. And I'm not a violent person. I'm not against nonviolent forms of resistance. I think that they're totally valid, and that there's many people that can't take certain risks. So engaging in strategies for nonviolent direct action, I think, is wonderful. However, it's been very bothersome to have proponents of nonviolence direct action and pacifism treat communities who engage in self-defense as violent. Yeah. So putting some context and some knowledge behind what's actually going on, and contextualizing community-based self-defense as nonviolence has been a very healing part of this process. And putting that out there and just being like, you know what, I think people who are under attack have a right to defend themselves. And just putting that into words and putting it out there has been extremely healing and extremely helpful to dealing with some of these frustrations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think putting words to what you shared, a very common experience for Indigenous people who have been criminalized at very young ages, men, women, and I know a lot of loved ones personally who at a very young age were also criminalized too, and I think it's just all too common an experience among our people that I always relate back to the settler states making us the savages, right? Like turning our pain, weaponizing our pain against us. And I think putting that into words in a book is going to be very liberating for a lot of people, and I can't wait to read it and to see that humanization of our pain and our rage and our anger. More of that needs to happen. So thank you for sharing that. And just reframing the question for you as well, Joaquin. I know we've kind of gone around the conversation for a little while, but going back to the frustrations and looking at the root of injustice, really being able to see it, which is why all of the radical imagination artists have been selected and supported, was because of your deep understanding of our pain, of our experience, our collective experience as Indigenous people, and then the very specific experiences of our own communities. And being able to have the vision to see something different, and to use your commitment as a community-based person, with whatever skills you can to imagine something different. How have you, Joaquin, with your specific art form and your way of connecting to community, how have you personally also benefited from the work, personally benefited mentally, spiritually, and you could obviously connect that to community too, but yeah, kind of benefited from or been able to navigate the frustrations, I guess you could say, with your art?
Pues durante, o sea, todo el año
well, throughout the entire year. This was a process of the work that of vestigios or remnants, the relationship with the farmers, the people that work on the milpa. We had a really tight relationship. We worked closely together. I've always been participated with in this, even as a child, and now I'm working in the community, having the Mayan ceremonies that we do in order to work the land. There's some more ceremony before, during, and after. All this type of community participation, and I'm really involved with the community. And what really helped me a lot is with the grant, I was be able to get like a little motorbike that has a little box behind, and I can then go, I can take things and I can take people's things with us, because sometimes we have to do the ceremony that's really far from the community because the lands are on really bad roads, and we really can't, we usually use bicycles, and then they have to take big tortillas and big pots with us, and bottles of water and things that we're going to serve. So it's really been great to say, hey, I can help you carry all these things there. And so what I do, it like this type of thing that we can do, just like this kind of collaboration, the mutual support, all these kinds of things, it really, then I start to understand, if I can do something like this in this movement, if I can stay here, I will always do this. And I can do and support all these different things, and I get involved in these ceremonies. These are ceremonies that are so important. Right now, for example, when we did the ceremony, Sakai, it's a corn drink. We do this ceremony so that before we can do the harvest of the corn, and then everybody that goes to that land, that plot of land, they have to, we mention their names, because all those people, they can do corn and squash and beans. If that person isn't there, you can't just go in there. You have to be named, because the story says that if you go in to steal from that, you can get lost in that same place. You may get lost in the labyrinth of the place, or maybe you could have an accident. And so when everybody first has the drink, then we have fruits. We eat the fruits. It's a marvelous ceremony, because after that, there's rain. The rain comes. There's like a big rain. Then after that, then we understand that the rain causes the soil to be fertile. We do this kind of ceremony. We clean the lands. And what I use is organic material from the milpa. I use the shell from the squash. I find like all the trash. I collect all the trash that's in the field on the edge of the roads, and we work together with other collaborators, and that's where I channel all my frustration. That's how I keep my calm. I try not to think of those other things. And we've been able to do these things to expedite all these things. I've been able to support. They support me. I support them. And there's this part, like those that work with me now, they're more stable economically. And if they're doing well, then I'm also doing well. And this is really satisfactory.
Yeah. That's a beautiful way to close that. Just that remark, and looking at our people's well-being, our individual well-being, and how that's so critical to collective well-being. Thank you all so much. We're rounding out and getting at the end of our time here, but I want to close out with something also, just a last question for each of you. And just to say, before we even get into that, to our viewers and viewers who are watching live and maybe watching later, that I know we've only gotten a small opportunity here to talk to each of the artists and hear about their work and their political analysis, their perceptions of the world, how they've, their own personal agency has really enabled them to really create something much more effective and meaningful and culturally appropriate for our people and our communities. But next week, during the Radical Imagination Virtual Festival Part 2, we'll be watching short films on Selena, Simone, and Joaquin, so we'll definitely get to hear more from each of them as well than there at that time. But I guess I'm also saying that too, like feeling kind of bad that we do have to end this program just for now. But yeah, just very, very moved and humbled and like just by your presence, all of you. And I know that I speak for our team and many of our colleagues and relatives here at NDN, just being able to hear your stories and your passion and to hear you speak from that deep place of your experiences, your communities. Really such an honor, and really I think those of us that had the privilege of conducting some of your other interviews for the films, like we take part of your stories and they're now a part of us and a part of making us feel empowered, making us feel like there's a lot of things to be hopeful for in the future amidst all of the real injustice that is still there that needs to be uprooted, and in many ways aggressively, because our people are experiencing deep harms from that. But there's also hope, right? And so on that note, I'd love for you to each go around and just share some last words about what really gives you hope in this time that we're in, with the challenges that we have. What are things that give you hope when it comes to the future of Indigenous people and, let's just say, the world moreover? And how about we just go around the room again, Selena, starting with Selena.
Sure. I think the thing that gives me hope in my work is, for me, really empowering the next generation to get involved in these conversations that affect their future. I know that it seems like these wicked problems are never ending, but I feel like it's worse to not be involved in the futurity of the way that we see ourselves in the future. If we just let other people design for us, it will probably not be the most ideal future, or it might just be inadequate for the actual people in these communities. From my perspective, I often see, because of the industry demographics, it's often outsiders designing for communities, and they often are on these timelines and on these schedules and in these budgets that are not really accountable to the people and to their well-being. So I think the biggest thing for me is to empower more people to take leadership, especially in design fields and in STEM fields, so that they can help influence the trajectory of our communities in the political realm, in the way that it's designed, and the way that the decisions are being made for our people.
Thanks, Selena. Simone, what is giving you hope amidst all the backdrop of the reality of what our people are still being faced with?
Well, I just have a lot of hope in the future generations more than anything else. And for me, this work is kind of like the report I'm handing them of what I've seen and lived, the good and the bad. Within that book, there's a lot of bad. Within that book, there's a lot of good. There's a lot of inspirational and hopeful stories of communities in resistance. And I hope that those stories can inspire the youth. But I have come to the point where I realize that my generation and older generations need to hand off the baton and understand that the next generations are going to do something completely different with it. And I hope to see some of that, but know that I won't see all of it. And I'm just hopeful that they will take this information and make the radical, fundamental change that our people need.
Yeah, thank you, Simone. And closing out with you, Joaquin, what gives you hope for the future amidst the different challenges that you and your community and your people face?
Pues la verdad, lo que pasa
To
es
be honest, what makes me feel more hopeful is the children and the youth in my community. At least they can mirror themselves in me. It's like, okay, I want to see like Reyes when I grow up, something as simple as that. That I can be like a role model, that I am the seed and there will be somebody following after me, the learning from me, and not just painting, but the learning to become community members, to sow the seed, to grow the crops, to take care of the land, the soil, which is our land as indigenous people. My hope is with the youth, with the children, and with the elders as well. All of their experience, the elders in the community that I have, all of that knowledge, all of that wisdom, their language, the few elders that we still have, having them appreciate, value them as a role model, as a reference for us. I mean, I have artists as a role model, but my elders are my inspiration. Those building the Maya houses, those the Maya architect, all of them are my references, my role models. My hope is with all of the children, youth, the elders, and to follow the paved road, to continue fighting from my independent individual space in my community. I've placed my hope that I will continue building up. I will continue organizing workshops, sharing with other Indigenous artists. So now I am involved with all of these community-based people, but I am looking out to other Maya communities so they come and see what I do, my work, so we can establish links, and they can bring their workshops to our community. They can teach people in our community exchanges, so I can go to their community, their independent spaces for art, and they can come. So is then space for exchanges, so I can continue making all of this alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Joaquin, and thank you all. Our youth are absolutely incredible in 2021 too. Like, they blow me away. They know things obviously that or teaching us. I have a son who teaches me all the time and checks me and helps me to be a better human, just based on things that I'm not. I think in my experience, just blind spots. They make us really aware of our blind spots. Our youth today are incredibly connected, and I can see them having a lot of passion for carving out that better future for us too. So thank you so much, Selena, Simone, and Joaquin. Obviously not just artists or storytellers, but deeply embedded in their communities, and that's what the work is all about. Obviously there's a very healing personal component, but there's also the future that we're all striving for our people. So again, thank you to all three of you, and again, a reminder to our audience that they will be joining us, or not joining us, we will be sharing their short films next Friday, November 19th. So thank you all, and we'll be in touch and look forward to seeing the future of your work.
Thank you, Sarah.
All right, we'll see you. All right, well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining the first program of part 1 of the Radical Imagination Virtual Festival. We just got done having a really phenomenal and grounding conversation with Simone, Selena, and Joaquin, and those are just 3 out of 10 of our Radical Imagination artists, incredibly poignant in their perspectives of the world, and incredibly powerful in their commitment to radically imagine a future that's more just and equitable for our communities. They all represent unique tribal nations, and so it's really been an honor to support their work in even just a small way. And we know too that they've been doing this work before us, and they'll continue to do it after us, and we wish them the best in their future, and we'll definitely be lifting up their work in the coming days and the coming year. So thanks so much for joining us. And before we close out, I just want to remind you of our upcoming programs for part 1. And so we just completed program 1. Our second program is going to be starting at 1:30 Mountain Standard Time, and we'll be talking to 3 more artists: Ryan Redcorn, Kara Romero, Isaac Murdoch, and Marianne Nicholson. So we'll be talking to 4 coming up. And then after that, we'll have our third program at 4:00 p.m. Mountain Time with Denali Hodgden, Hinale Moana, and D.A. Navadi. So we'll be closing out with 3 more at 4:00 Mountain Time, and then we'll also be joined in that third program by with a performance by Frank Wan and also Tanea Winder. So stick around and hope you guys come back, and thank you if you're joining us later, and we'll see you soon.